Well, hello. This is Tom Pope, and my name is Glenn Greenidge, and we're coming to you today to have some conversations on what is community and what is the work that we look to do inside of our podcast. So, Tom, what would you say is your definition of community? What would you say that when someone says community, what does that mean to you?
Okay, this is interesting because if you Google the word community, um, you get an answer of a community is a social group whose members have something in common: shared government, geographic location, culture, heritage, also the physical place where the group lives. But if you add one word, what's a social community? You get a broader, more intense kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That meaning, according to Google, a social community are connections, relationships, and information built on the practice of continuous learning. Knowledge based social communities are crucial to sustain an economic level and an environment for community members. You quite a difference in how that is interpreted.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it's quite broad as you pointed to in terms of, well, what does that mean? That means could be a chess club, could be a soccer team, a baseball team in the community, could be um, church community, temple, um, could be could be workers looking for jobs. We've got the community outside of JFK redevelopment. That's a particular community, a host community. The host in the um, the manufacturing or the development of something either inside or next to their community that's going to impact them. So all of these are different definitions of community.
Oh, the thing that struck me the most in the difference of these two meanings, leaving out the word social, you get the idea that the community is simply some connection with others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the minute you add that word social, suddenly there is this idea where you're trying to aid the livelihoods of people in that community. You're trying to keep alive the social networking, the sustainability, not just of some people, but everyone in
in that
that community.
in that community, yeah. And the key thing that I heard in that was the learning, having that community advance collectively. So there's something about moving forward socially, and of course you can't separate social from economics. So when you begin to look at socialization, you look at the economic impact of that particular community or communities that are now surfacing to organize themselves or to even acknowledge who they are. Um, one of the interesting things about the Black community, and I say Black community, which is encompasses depends on your definition, because do I relate to being Black, or am I African, am I West Indian, am I South American? you know um if you go outside of America, most people don't have the same relationship to Black, and so you now have a whole nother dynamic of, well, who do I call myself? Who do I relate to as my community socially? economically.
And to add to that, I'm thinking of there's an author who talked about a Black in a community that needs to call the police. What the person doesn't want is a Black cop because the Black cop would treat him differently than the white cop. As bad as the white cop is in terms of prejudice, the Black cop identifies with the culture not of the Black community, but rather the police department. So you have a, a different, here's an example of two different communities vying with each other.
Right. Looking the same,
Right.
but vying, clearly coming from a different background. And you're absolutely right. It's so when you begin to define community, and especially social communities, I mean, it almost to me is that there's no rock unturned, because anything and everything can be applied inside of that context of social community. Now,
I think one of the problems we face is um, if we're talking about institutional racism,
hmm
let's look at, you mentioned economic, in that meaning of the social community where you try to economically help everyone in the community.
hmm
This is a different concept than John Doe in the community who happens to be a CEO of an economic entity. John Doe is not going to want to help the people in the community as much as his economic entity. So there's an institutionalized problem of not building up that learning for the community around John Doe, but just himself and his organization.
well, you've opened up really a can of worms when you think about it, because we're talking about the educational impact of the community. We've talked a little bit about the economic. We talked about the political impact of that particular community, and when you begin to look at how do you economically develop a particular community, now you're looking at who are the engines inside of that community and what are they doing to support that community in uplifting itself. And until we begin to move forward collectively, um, you've got a disarray of activities that not always are in sync with each other, such that the community gets the advantage of the learning, of the information, of the energy that's associated with those um, different variables that we just talked about.
That definition about the social uh, community um, made it sound as though everything that is being done has to be done to help the entire community. So that word social is not something coming from the top, it's coming from everyone. This is a very different concept. This is very similar to a tribal society where everyone works together. We don't have the idea of NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute, we have to do something to help the entire community, even if we're trying to help others in this community who need help. It is in my backyard. Everything is my backyard because we have to share together.
True, true. And I don't know that that is a concept that everybody shares as community. you know, um, we get to look at community from certainly from a strategic and a platform of analysis, but oftentimes community just is and exists undistinguished as such, even inside of itself.
Um, it's interesting. We keep being afraid of the homeless situation. After the terrible hurricane in St. Martin a few years ago, their homeless population did not increase dramatically because everyone in the area offered up some living accommodation to people who lost homes. This is so different from NIMBY.
It is. It is. And and I'm left with our social economic morality, um, that guides us, that that allows me to connect with other members in my quote unquote neighborhood, which is another level of community, whether I acknowledge it or not. Do I speak to my neighbors? I happen to, but not everybody does. So, how is that, those relationships getting cultivated and getting acknowledged and reinforced or dissolved, by actions of the individuals labeling that
There
community.
was no dividing force in early tribal societies. And the elders, the leaders would even include others. Um, but today, because we have divisions politically and economically that want to control certain groups of people, we have these divisions that create something like NIMBY.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're talking about an institutional racism. How do we change that mindset?
Tom, that's a very interesting question, and I think that's one that we've been engaging in over the years, with no simple solution. It's a very complex conversation with lots of variables, each weighing in on the total outcome. And so, the best that I can say is to begin to uh, be present to what are those variables and begin to look at how those variables impact the individual communities.
What would you say in closing?
I would say in closing that the work of community is certainly ongoing. There are different aspects of community that keep emerging, um, as well as old aspects that keep reemerging, and the maintaining the balance of the old and the new together as we look, um, is the only way that we can keep adapting to what the changing aspects of the this area that we call community.
Well, if you like what you've heard, get in touch with us on Facebook, Community and Social Change.